welcome to Mounted Archery with Ken, where I discuss all things mounted archery. Many of the things I discuss are things that work for me or for others that I know that may help you in your quest for greater accuracy, more enjoyment of the sport. Today I want to discuss arrow selection for mounted archery to help you achieve better accuracy. After all, that's what it's all about, right? We'll break down the arrow into the different parts. We'll talk about how that arrow flies once it's released from your full draw from the bowstring. And then we'll talk about what happens to that arrow as it flies, and how to work through different scenarios in arrow design and build to overcome different things. We'll also talk about knocks, like I say, all the different components, and some customization, some of the different materials that are available as well. So here we go. Hope this helps you. And at any time, if you have any questions, drop a comment in there and I'll try to get back with you, or you can email me and we can discuss this between you and I. Okay. So here we have a mounted archery arrow. This one just happens to be made of wood. We'll talk about materials a little bit later. So the components are a shaft. You have a pile or a point. You have a nock. Right here you have fletching. Okay? So those are the parts of an arrow. And each one of these parts is essential to how this arrow flies. Some more so than others, and we'll get to each one of these as we go. When you release an arrow from the string, okay, let's say I'm shooting thumb draw, okay, and we release this arrow from the string, this arrow is going to bend around the bow, just like this. And as it passes the bow, it's going to flex back the other way, and it's going to travel down towards the target, just like this. Often you can't see that, and the reason you can't see that is because the arrow is well tuned. An arrow that's not well tuned to the archer, the bow, and the release style, you will be able to see that paradox as you go through. So the idea is to not be able to see it. It's happening though. So how do we work through archer's paradox to make this arrow accurate downrange? Every aspect of this arrow has something to do with its flight. And the point, you might think, we'll just start there. You might believe that the point has nothing to do with how it flies, but actually it does. The point has a major influence on the flight of this arrow because of its weight. Speaking strictly for mounted archers, the weight of the arrow makes a difference in the flight of this arrow. How does that happen? So back to releasing the string. So the bowstring is imparting a force at the nock. Okay, that force is sent through the shaft of the arrow and it ends right here at the point. So it's pushing against that point, and the weight of that point causes the arrow to flex. Okay? So push, bend, just like that. I'm holding back with this hand right here on the point, and I'm pushing against the nock with my other hand. See how that arrow flexes? Again, that's archer's paradox. So why does the weight of the point make a difference here? Well, two things. First, the heavier the point, the more that arrow is going to flex. Also, the heavier the point, the more stable that paradox will be in the course of the flight. Or also put a lighter point on the end, and it's going to stiffen this arrow up quite a bit. So if I don't hold on to the front of this arrow quite as much and I push against it, see, it doesn't bend as much. So that's where the weight of the point controls much of the flight of this arrow through the paradox stage. So the length of the shaft will do the same thing. So arrow length, we're going to talk about when you order an arrow, different things that the person you are buying this arrow from should be asking and needs to know. Because for a given spine of an arrow, again, something else we're going to talk about, you'll have a different flex or deflection ability in the shaft. And the length of this arrow, it also will determine when that bowstring is released and forces, it puts that force against the shaft of the arrow, how much the arrow flexes, as well as the point weight. So now, see, we're going to muddy the waters here because there's a lot of different things that goes into this. The weight of the bow, the length of the arrow, the length of the draw, because, on a horse bow, the longer the draw, the more force the arrow is going to take as well. So shorter draw, not so much. So shorter arrow, going to be a little stiffer. Longer arrow is going to be a little softer. So that's another thing that affects the arrow flight, the fletching. Okay. I'm going to contradict myself a little bit on fletching. Fletching steers the arrow. Fletching will help you overcome archer's paradox, or even lack thereof, just with feathers. So fletching is more for forgiveness in flaws in your form. Maybe the arrow's not perfectly made for you, your bow, your circumstances. So the fletching takes in all of that. But fletching adds weight to the back of the arrow as well. So a couple of different things. You add weight to the back of the arrow, you stiffen the spine a little bit. What happens when you stiffen the spine? Well, again, archer's paradox, so it's going to run a little bit stiffer on release, but it's going to hit the bow. It's going to hit the side of the bow when it releases on a stiff arrow. So it's going to tend to kick this arrow a little bit wider. The fletching will overcome a lot of that. Okay? So that's why a lot of times you'll see arrows with a big feather or a lot of feathers back here. And a lot of that is just to overcome a stiff spine. So that pretty much sums up the different parts of the arrow and how they affect the flight. I didn't really talk much about the nock. I mean, really, the nock's job is to take the energy from the bowstring and put it to the shaft. That's it for the nock. It goes a little deeper than that with mounted archery, because now we talk about loading, shooting, draw styles, different things like that, where that nock can be more important. We'll get into that a little bit later, parts of the arrow. All right, so let's talk about spine. Spine, wow. That's a deep subject. It's a deep rabbit hole. And we will cover more of that, both static and dynamic spine later on in another video. Because, again, we can use up a lot of time just talking about Okay, so spine. When you order arrows, they're going to ask you what spine you want. Even when you order shafts to make arrows with, they're going to want to know what spine you want to start with. So every manufacturer of carbon arrows, and I'll kind of stick with carbon arrows, natural materials to some degree, but mostly with carbon arrows. Every manufacturer will mark what spine the shaft is right on the shaft. Every shaft you buy has that mark, what spine it is. So these numbers, the higher the number, say 7 or 800, that's a softer spine. And then, 5 and 600, those are a little stiffer spines. And it goes down from there. I mean, I think I've seen some spine numbers in like the high 200s before. So those are really stiff arrows for really high poundage bows, that sort of thing. So, so what does that number mean? Well, basically, it is there's a formula based on the deflection of this arrow. So, if the arrow is suspended between two set points with a set weight hung from the center of it, they'll measure what that deflection is in thousandths of an inch usually. There's also metric measurements, but that number, that 600, that 700, that is directly related to how much deflection with a given weight, with this shaft supported at a given distance, how much it deflects. So that helps the arrow maker determine what spine value is best for a given archer. And I say that because different draw lengths, different bow weights, different draw styles, all of this stuff goes into play on the overall dynamic spine of the arrow. Right now I'm just talking about static spine. So the static spine between two points, a given weight, and they measure the deflection. So that's the starting point. Now the rabbit hole gets much deeper. So this arrow has to be made for a person that's shooting a certain weight bow at a certain draw length. Okay? Draw length can be determined by a lot of different things. Your shooting style, for instance. So somebody shooting Mediterranean, okay, and they draw to the corner of their mouth, say. I'm just throwing that out there. Okay, that's going to be a different draw length than that same person possibly shooting thumb, drawing to the back of their jawbone. Okay? Different draw lengths, same person. That's why the shooting style is also important, because it's going to change the draw length and therefore the arrow length. Okay, I mentioned before, the length of the arrow affects the dynamic spine. So that's where that match has to happen. You change draw styles, you probably need to look at changing your arrow length, and perhaps if it changes your draw length significantly, you probably need to change the spine of your arrows as well. So, as I said, that's a deep rabbit hole, and a lot of other factors going into play with that. Again, the fletching, the point weight, all of that. So it requires a conversation between you and your arrow builder, and that's where kind of ordering arrows just offline at a given length, given spine, that sort of thing, probably isn't the best solution for accuracy. Can you do that and shoot that arrow? Yeah, you can. Can you shoot it accurately? Maybe. Probably not. Okay? So that's why we're talking about this today. We want to help you improve your accuracy. All right. So we talked about draw length. Let's talk about the bow. So I mentioned before with the paradox, the bowstring is going to be pushing against this nock, and it's going to flex that arrow. Okay, so different draw weights on the bow. Okay, draw weight on a horse bow is also directly related to your draw length. So you'll buy a bow, and usually there's one or two different weight markings on it. The most prevalent is a certain poundage at 28 inches. What does that mean? Okay, so what they do is when they measure that is they will draw this bow on a scale, and they'll draw it to 28 inches from its brace height. Okay, so at that given draw, they measure how many pounds force is needed to draw it to that. Okay, that's where that comes from. Sometimes they'll say it's at 30 inches or 31 inches even, but usually that's coupled with the draw weight at 28 inches. So why 28 inches? Well, actually most people are right around 28-inch draw. Believe it or not, most people are. Some are much longer draw, some are much shorter draw, but the average draw for human beings is 28 inches. So it can vary either side of 28 inches, but if you're in that 28-inch range, you're going to come pretty close to that when you draw that bow back. Okay, so we're getting back to our dynamic spine. So a person shoots 25 pounds. Okay, this is a 600 spine shaft. That's probably not going to fly the best for that 25-pound bow for a couple of reasons. Okay, first, it's too stiff. This arrow is gonna hit that bow, and it can bounce off. Okay, and that's usually the way it goes. So if I'm shooting thumb, all right, and the arrow flexes. Okay, so it doesn't flex enough, and it's gonna impact the side of that bow, and it's gonna bounce this arrow off to my right for a right-handed shooter. Okay, if I'm shooting Mediterranean, it's gonna be the opposite. It's gonna bounce it off to the left. That means a lot when you come to accuracy. Will it impact the target? Yeah, it probably will, but it's going to hit the target sideways or at an angle. It may stick in. It may kind of peel out because this tail's going to whip on around when it does impact if it's a close target. Worst case scenario, what it does is over time, it's going to destroy the way the fibers of this arrow hold together right here, because it's flexing it sideways all the time every time it impacts a target. So not so good. Now you can put a heavier point on this. You can go with a longer shaft. You can even put more feathers on it, or a combination of all the above to get that spine under control for a lighter weight bow. It's not the best case scenario. The best case scenario is to get the right spine first and then tune this. It's so much easier to tune. So how do I do it? I start with a 125 grain tip. Okay, why that? Well, it's kind of a standard. It's kind of a good starting point to start with 125 grains. It's something I've done all my life. Whether I'm target archery or hunting or what have you, I start with 125 grains. It's very predictable what behind this point, the rest of the arrow, what I need to do when I start with the same weight. Okay, and I do that for my customers as well. Start with 125 grain. Also very easy to find anywhere in the world, 125 grain point. All right, so start with 125 grain. Now I gotta figure out the draw length and then the arrow length. So draw length. How do we do that? Well, just to illustrate, okay, this is the back of the bow. All right, the side towards you is the belly of the bow. All right, so I'm gonna stick this through here like I'm shooting Mediterranean. All right, so I draw this to 28 inches. Or well, okay, I draw it to my draw length, let's say. And I measure, I have somebody come and make a mark right there, right against the back of my bow on the arrow when I'm at full draw. And I let down. And I do that again, and I let down, and I do that again. I'm usually going to get like 3 different marks, but they're going to be pretty close, all right? That gives me a pretty good range to work in. And so the arrow length then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 inches. Okay, why 2 inches? Because 2 inches, I'm not going to overdraw this arrow. If I have 2 extra inches on the end of this, I'm not going to overdraw. And again, 2 inches, nice round number, very easy to determine what the final dynamic spine of this arrow is going to be on any given shot from that bow with me shooting it, okay? So my draw length, measured that with the bow, take the arrow, take that measurement from the throat of the nock, I come down, okay, there's my draw length. Now I'm going to add 2 inches. That's where I cut the shaft. All right, that's where the arrow length comes from. All right, why don't I include the point on that? Because I don't cut the point, I cut the shaft. So that's what I want to know, where I need to cut that shaft. So now I know what the arrow length needs to be. I know what the point weight is. I know what the bow weight is. I know what the draw length is. All right, different bows, it's going to be a little bit different, but you can kind of say, okay, 3 to 4 inches of draw can roughly be equivalent to 5 pounds of draw weight. So, but I'm not much over 28 inches. Okay, that's negligible. All right, so I know that I've added 2 inches to this arrow as well. Okay, why is that important? Well, if I'm adding 3 or 4 inches, that's going to greatly affect the dynamic spine of this arrow as well. 2 inches, yeah, that can affect it too. But within that 2 inches, I can lighten or make my point a little bit heavier should I desire to get better flight out of this arrow or need to. So that's kind of, these are rules of thumb, all right? You know, as far as what I add, the point weight and the length at the end. Now, I've had people say, whoa, 2 inches, I'm worried that in the heat of the moment, I'm going to draw this thing and you know, I'm going to overdraw it. Not so much. I'm not saying it can't happen. It can. But the chances of that, usually 99% of the time when somebody is shooting off of a cantering horse and those arrows are those targets are coming up pretty quick, they're short drawing. They're not even getting back to that full draw. And there'll be quite a bit more of this arrow hanging out past that bow than if they're just standing on the ground shooting at targets, okay? So that's another thing to consider too. So you, if you're consistently short drawing, this arrow's not going to fly right. But here's the thing: the more you shoot, the more consistent you're going to become in your draw. The more you practice, the more consistent that draw is going to become. And then, you know, all of it starts coming together. Your arrow flight gets better. Your accuracy improves. So all's not lost just because you order a set of arrows and you short draw and it's a little stiff, okay? Because, again, with practice that will improve. You can, in the meantime, you can put heavier point. I wouldn't, okay? I wouldn't. Anything you change on this arrow, if you keep changing this arrow around, you're never going to have a baseline for your brain's computer to go, okay, this is what I need to do to make this happen. Because we don't shoot with sights or anything. Some people shoot with what they call a floating draw. And, so all of these calculations are going on in your head, whether you know it or not. And it all comes from practice. So there's no substitute. You can't order an arrow that's going to overcome lack of practice. So, but I'm getting off in the weeds here. So we've talked about the bow, we've talked about arrow length, we've talked about draw length, we've talked about point weight, and that kind of brings us back to fletching. Okay, I'm asked all the time, why a certain shape, why 4 feathers or 3 feathers or 2 feathers in some cases. To me, the shape doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters on the fletching is size. Okay, well, size, I should say, size and quantity. So, which are different. So this is a 4-fletched arrow, and man, these feathers are ragged. All right, I don't worry about that. I really don't. This is one of my arrows. It's well tuned to me, my shooting, and I do a lot of bare shaft tuning when I'm making my own arrows. So if I don't get near perfect flight without any feathers, then the arrow's not right. Okay, so but that's just me. Not everybody has the desire or the means of doing a lot of bare shaft testing, figuring out what length and what spine and what point weight, all this stuff, what works best for them. So the statement I'm about to make, I'm going to contradict here almost immediately, but this arrow can fly just fine without any feathers on it. Okay, I had a guy hand me, I was at a competition, and the guy handed me one of my arrows back as I was walking back, going back to the start, and he handed it up to me, and he says, man, that one feather, it's almost gone, and I don't know if you want to shoot it. Dude, it doesn't even need feathers to fly, and I'll stand by that statement. Feathers overcome a lot of things, though. So as I mentioned before, it can overcome a little stiff spine. So if you short draw and you have some feathers on here, it can overcome that. It can help you overcome it without changing the point weight or anything else. So that's why I put feathers on my arrows, because I'm not perfect. I mean, my wife thinks I am, right? So I put feathers on my arrows, and it overcomes imperfections in me. It overcomes imperfections in a lot of things, less than ideal conditions, which when we're on the back of a cantering horse, most of the time we're in less than ideal conditions for shooting a bow. So we try to put everything in our favor, right? Fletching. All right, so I like 4-fletch. Why? There's really no reason. The 4-fletch, I mean, I can do just the same thing with 3-fletch, right? Or even 2-fletch. So 4-fletch, again, it's just a little more peace of mind. I know that there's plenty of stabilization on the back of this arrow to overcome my imperfections. Also, these feathers, they get worn. Some of them get worn out. I've got quite a few worn out arrows, feathers on arrows anyway. And so, if you have 4 on there, it's just that much more reassurance, but it's really not needed. Shape, it's personal preference, right? The length and the height, okay? Those are really the two things that matter the most as far as the function of the fletching. So for target archery in general, mounted archery as well. I like 4-inch fletch. Okay, 4 inches long from the point to the back. That's what I prefer. Why 4 inch? Well, it's kind of a common length of feather, for one. On my old hunting arrows, I used to do 5.5 inch fletch, and much taller. Again, more feather, more stabilization, more more of everything I want a feather for. So, so why don't I go with bigger feathers on these arrows? Well, bigger feathers will slow an arrow down quicker. All right. So if I'm on a Tower 110 course, that first shot's a long one. Okay. I don't want this arrow to slow down. Or if I'm on the hunt course in the long shot. So a little less feather. So maybe I'll put 4 feathers on here as smaller profile to get the same effects as fewer feathers with a higher profile. So often there's a trade-off in that. Much of this, again, is personal preference. So I really like a banana cut feather. Yeah, I've got some, but yeah, right here. There's some banana cut feathers. I think they look great on an arrow. My wife hates them. Okay, and speaking of my wife, she likes the bi-deltas. Okay, she claims that they don't interfere with with the wind on a cantering horse and everything. She doesn't get wind resistance on these feathers as she's handling this arrow. Okay, I think there's something to that actually. I haven't noticed a big difference myself. Some people just like the looks of these too, so there's that. And again, talking about personal preference, try different things. That's feathers are one of the things that you can play around a little bit without totally destroying the way that arrow flies. To some degree, like I say, too big of a feather, you can slow the arrow down too fast. So that's pretty much it on how the different components affect the dynamic spine. And of course, I covered a little bit of the archer and the bow. We'll get into that a little bit more now because we're going to talk about these nocks, right? Okay, these nocks. Wow. So there's a lot of different options in mounted archery nocks. These particular ones, I used to really like these. These are Vermeil M nocks. Not that I don't like them now. I just found another nock that I like a little more, right? So a lot of different options in nocks, and more so for the insert nocks in 246 thousandths of an inch insert range, and I'll explain that. But for now, let's just focus on why would you want one nock over another, okay? So, for instance, go back to my arrow right here. These are Vermeil X nocks. Okay, they're fairly new on the market, and for me, I really like this nock. I funnel load. Okay, different loading styles are going to require a different nock. So I funnel load. My wife scoop loads. Okay, so she prefers a fang nock. Okay, for the scoop loading. She tried using these X nocks, and they're like 90 degrees different than what she needs to perform her loading technique. All right, so the nock can make a huge difference in that. I mentioned that I liked these M nocks before, and I still do. I've still got them on my flu arrows, mostly because they come in a glue-on, and we'll get into that too. So the M nocks, I liked them because I got fat fingers and speed blind knocking just usually don't go together. But a big nock, man, I can feel that thing in my fingers, and I know exactly where it's going on bowstring. So other people, they like a really small nock. Hey, more power to them. If I could get away with a smaller nock, I would, because sometimes those big nocks can get in your way as well. So personal preference, but it is going to depend on your loading and shooting style. I shoot Mediterranean currently. I'm transitioning to more of a Slavic, but so Mediterranean with these X-Nox, some people can't do that. All right, it doesn't really bother me. It did kind of at first, but the loading was so quick and automatic with these for me that I overcame that. Most people shooting Mediterranean aren't going to like these nocks. Instead, they may like the Koch nocks, med style, or perhaps another kind of nock. Again, these M nocks were pretty good for that as well. So your loading and shooting style will make a huge difference on the nock that you choose. You might want to try a few different ones. Recently, had a person try some X-Nox. Not with me, they were trying somebody else's X-Nox. And they had ordered some Fang Nox from me. Fang Nox are, they're a great nock, really. But their loading style really fit the X-Nox. And we got to talking, yeah, I kind of like that, Well, here, by all means, try them. Give it a try. Man, this person's shooting skyrocketed. Not just because of the nocks. There were a lot of other things involved, but her speed knocking, everything associated with the nock, really improved just by a change of nock. So that kind of segues us into the different shaft materials, and basically any arrow shafting that's ever been made is available for mounted archery as well. So we'll talk about some of the less popular ones. Fiberglass. Okay, I've got some old fiberglass shafts that I don't know. I can't even remember where I got these. I got them years ago. I was going to use them for hunting, and they work great for flu-flus. So but there are some fiberglass shaft options out there for the mounted archer to explore. You will probably, you're not going to be able to get an insert nock to work in those for the most part. You're going to have a glue-on nock, that sort of thing. There's bamboo. Okay, bamboo's a nice natural material that I've always been taught that these are like nature's carbon. Okay, so I made some. I played around with them quite a bit actually, and they're no more durable than any other shaft material, arrow material out there. They're very labor intensive to make a good arrow out of. These things, they tend to be a lot more crooked in the raw state, a lot less consistent in spine. And with a long arrow, that's not going to be quite as important. In a lot of the Asiatic shooting styles that have really long draws, then the bamboo works out a little bit better there. But for me, I'm not a big fan of bamboo. I do make them. They're historically accurate in a lot of instances. If that's important to you, it's still a very viable arrow material. Just be prepared to pay a premium to get good ones, because there's a lot of the bamboo arrows out there on the market that are less than ideal, and you can get them at different price points. The higher the price point, generally, the better the arrow is going to be. So, wood, talked about consistency with wood. And the wood arrows used to be a specialty, might still are, I guess. This particular arrow, it's Port Orford cedar on the shafting. I did splice some wingy on the end. This is called footing. So this is a footed arrow, a footed shaft, because I spliced this hardwood on the end. Why did I do that? Well, there's a few different reasons for that. The heavier hardwood adds a little more weight up front. It changes the dynamic spine a little bit. It's also a little more durable in some cases. At the front of the arrow where it tends to snap off right behind the point. This probably won't do that. It would take a heck of an impact for that to happen. Other things can happen to the shaft before that happens, but that's just one example. This particular arrow doesn't have a point on it, but you can see that that's the 5-degree taper that a glue-on point would go on. So this arrow I was showing you before that doesn't have a knock on it, okay, that it's just Port Orford cedar the whole way, and it's stained and painted by hand. It's kind of I hate to say a run-of-the-mill arrow, because this particular set of arrows, when I made them for my daughter, I made them plus or minus 5 pounds in spine deflection, so across the dozen, and they're within 10 grains of weight from one arrow to the next. So these are highly matched set of arrows out of very premium wood shafting that I made for my daughter. I mentioned a premium cost, like on the cedar, or on the bamboo. The cedar, it kind of the same way. They're the footed shafts are going to be a lot more expensive. There's a lot more work in them, right? And so often I hear people, maybe I'll just get a cheap set of wood arrows, and you don't want to do that. Cheap wood arrows. Let's talk about that a little bit. The quality of the shafting alone is not going to allow a cheap wood arrow. So if you have less than desirable shafting where the grain runs off, and it makes it more prone to breaking. Sometimes if that grain runs off in the wrong part of the shaft, it can break when you release the bowstring just from the forces of Archer's paradox on that arrow. It can snap it, potentially, put part of that arrow through your bow arm or something. It has happened, okay? So stay away from the cheap wood arrows. There really isn't such a thing. And any natural material is going to require arrow builder more work, more labor, jacks up the price of the arrow. The shafting's not that much cheaper than anything, any of the synthetics, the man-made shafting. So additional work jacks the price up. And so we'll go back to the man-mades. Of course, we got aluminum shafting. Okay. Still, this is a viable option for mounted archers. Okay. There's different spine values associated with aluminum shafting. If you get with a reputable arrow builder or even your local archery pro shop, they can guide you down the path to getting the right spined aluminum shafting, or right spined arrows if you're buying them ready made. So, but again, you're probably going to have either a pin knock or a glue-on knock, that sort of thing. So, just some things. Aluminum is probably one of the cheaper alternatives, right? Okay. And then before we get to the one that pretty much most everybody uses, we'll discuss there's some hybrid materials out there. There's some materials where it's like aluminum shaft with carbon wrapped around it, a hybrid shaft. Sometimes there's three different materials in some of the shafting, and in those cases, again, those are usable shafting. A lot of times you kind of go, well, why would I want to do that? Sometimes it has to do with the longevity, the durability of that material. But they are more expensive when you get to that. So that brings us to what most mounted archers use. I mean, I've kind of been throwing these around, and carbon. So I've got quite a few different carbon shafts around here. Um, Most of us associate the black carbon shaft. These they have graphics on them. Okay, makes it like a wood grain graphic. Same with like this particular brand name here. It's got a wood graphic on it. It's all for show. But the quality of the carbon shafting does make a little bit of a difference. And by quality, these particular ones that I'm using now, they're a little more durable than the old. And these are Warriors, okay. This one right here, that's a Warrior shaft. It's got I've got this wrap on it. It's covering up all of that. But this is a Warrior shaft. Fairly inexpensive, well liked, well used across mounted archery. There's really nothing wrong with this shaft. It's just not quite as durable as these shafts, okay? These shafts are a little more expensive too, so there you go. There's the trade-off. You want durability, you're going to pay a little bit more, but that's perfectly good shaft right there. There's nothing wrong with one of these cheaper carbon shafts. They're a little bit thinner usually, and that makes them a little less durable. So that's one thing I really look at in shafting is price point and durability. There's a trade-off there. Okay, and sometimes with different shafts, a more flexible spine, a higher spine number, is going to be much less durable than a lower spine number, a stiffer shaft. And the reason for that is with carbon, the spine value, how much that shaft flexes, is pretty much directly related to how thick that shafting is on its annulus. So the thickness of that shaft, of course, that goes into the durability as well. When they add the graphics on these, it tends to give it a little more durability for some reason. I'm not real sure. The graphics aren't that thick, but it's just enough that it adds durability to the overall shaft. So along those lines, let's talk about customization, okay? Does that help you improve accuracy? Well, actually, it kind of does. If you've got a beautiful arrow and with beautiful feathers on it, it's the colors you want. I mean, everything's right with the world, right? Well, maybe not. But in your mind, if you are happy with your equipment, and this goes with anything, your bow, your horse, whatever, your saddle, if you're happy with it, if you like the way it looks, then you have more confidence in it. You're going to shoot better in the long run. Does it have a huge effect? Probably not. not near as much as the nuts and bolts of this arrow, but it does in your psyche affect the way you shoot, or it can. Some people don't care, you know. Again, to each his own. I like pretty arrows, you know. I like decent looking bows. You know, I pride myself on what I show up at a competition with. Some people don't care, and it's just about putting that arrow on that target, and that's fine too. Um, hey, I kind of wish I could be that way. I'd probably do things a lot different than I do now, but I do like to flaunt it a little bit. Um, the wraps, you know, again, getting into some of the customization. Um, you've noticed, you know, most of mine and my wife's arrows, they have wraps. I even some of my daughter's carbon arrows have wraps on them. Why is that? Well, we have our club logo on them, put our names on them, different designs, different color schemes. We can do a lot of things that identify this as ours. But one of the most important things that I usually do with my personal arrows, and this is just a personal thing, mostly because I can't shoot very well, is I get these retro reflective. Okay, this wrap, if well, this isn't my arrow, but I do it anyway. This wrap, if I miss the target with an arrow and it scoots in under the grass, for whatever reason I can't find it in the daylight with the retro reflective, all I got to do is go out at night with my flashlight, and this thing glows. I mean, it's like, oh, there it is. So that's really the reason why I put wraps on the arrows. You can stiffen the spine just by putting wraps on. So that's something to keep in mind if you're building your own arrows, or if you're ordering arrows from somebody that's making them for you. If they're putting wraps on, one of the conversations you need to have is how will that wrap affect arrow flight? And the reason I suggest that that's a conversation you should have is because it will affect arrow flight. And a lot of arrow makers are just, oh, okay, what colors, you know, oh, you want to do, oh yeah, we'll put your name on, whatever. And they might forget, I'm putting a lot of weight on the back of that arrow. They want four fletch, they want, you know, these wraps, they're going to put a big knock on there. And that needs to be in their mind when they decide what spine to start with, okay, because it affects the dynamic spine down the road. So again, it's another consideration. Another item, it's something of a customization. It also has a function, is right at the front of the feathers here. You see I got this little band. That's actually fabric paint, that dimensional fabric paint, or some people call it puffy paint. It's for fabric. You can buy it at Walmart, what have you. So on my arrows, my wife's arrows, we use this paint to just to cover up the front end of the leading edge of that feather, those feathers, and that helps protect our hands. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, you can wrap thread, and you can do this stuff yourself after you buy the arrow, and rather than pay somebody to do it for you. But here's some heat shrink. I experimented with some heat shrink at one time. One of the drawbacks to the heat shrink I found is this will loosen up over time. Sometimes this leading edge will curl, and it's just as bad as that feather sticking in your hand. So So I kind of moved away from the heat shrink, but I mean it still works. Another one is electrical tape. This is some electrical tape on this arrow, and that works great actually. It kind of looks a little sloppy. It doesn't look very professional. I don't like to do it on arrows I'm selling to somebody just because it doesn't look professional. I much prefer to thread wrap or paint the leading edge on arrows that I sell. So that's just another thing that it's not even really necessary. If you don't want a feather in your hand, there's the alternative to that is to wear some sort of protection on your bow hand or on your index finger, anywhere where the arrow is contacting your hand as you're drawing and shooting. You can protect that, wear a glove, that sort of thing, or some of the alternatives that I've discussed with you here. Or you can do nothing at all and just pick some feathers out of your hand every now and then. It's kind of painful, that, oh, it's just a fletch wound. Yeah, no, that's sometimes, and it can affect your shooting till that heals too, so keep that in mind. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Again, if you have questions or comments, or your own experiences in this stuff, drop it in the comments. Don't hesitate. And if you want to learn more about this, you can email me. You can make a comment. You can click on subscribe link. I've got another link to be on my email list, and where I will send you more information as needed, as I get more videos out, that sort of thing. So, hope to see you down the road.